les pido que nos acompañen en esta segunda parte de nuestro foro.
I'd like to ask you to join us during the second portion of our forum. I remind everyone that we are joined by many people online. This is a hybrid session, so it's not just us who are present here, but we are also joined by a lot of people from the Latin American Caribbean region online. I don't want to give out any numbers, but we've been told that we have more than 7,000 connections from yesterday. So many more people have joined us today, and I just wanted to highlight these numbers to be more precise. I remind everyone that you can, referring to our colleagues that are joining us online, that you can submit your comments or questions through the chat room, or you could access Housing Forum 2022.
El día de hoy queremos abrir con nuestro panel Soluciones al déficit habitacional mediante la vivienda sustentable de interés social. Luego de los tres paneles tendremos un cierre de nuestras autoridades del banco, así que sin más quiero invitar a nuestro primer moderador, quien presentará a sus panelistas. Adelante, Rodrigo Navas, quien es el jefe de la unidad de manufactura de BidInvest.
Go ahead, Rodrigo Navas, Manufacturing Unit Chief for IDB Invest. Good morning, Rodrigo.
En América Latina y el Caribe, existe una brecha entre los recursos públicos disponibles y los que se necesitan para promover el acceso a una vivienda digna y asequible. La informalidad, la falta de información confiable y los bajos niveles de bancarización dificultan la atención al déficit habitacional en nuestra región. Es momento de reimaginar el presente y mirar hacia el futuro, con productos financieros innovadores e inclusivos que faciliten el acceso a una vivienda digna y sostenible y que promuevan una mayor inversión del sector privado en el mercado de vivienda social. ¿Qué productos innovadores se están ofreciendo en el mercado para disminuir el rezago habitacional? ¿Qué oportunidades de inversión existen para fondos de viviendas inclusivas? ¿Cuáles son algunos de los posibles cambios en la regulación que facilitarían un mayor acceso a financiamiento de vivienda? Acompáñenos a explorar estas interrogantes para encontrar soluciones que nos ayuden a construir un futuro mejor.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Greetings from IDB Invest to all of the people that are joining us here today. And as Fernando was saying, the thousands who are joining us online. I'd like to welcome everyone to our second day of this forum. It's a day that I'm sure will be filled with conversations about opportunities and challenges. The panel that we will undertake right now will speak about solutions to the housing deficit through the development of public sustainable housing. I don't know, but yesterday I think I learned a great deal. First of all, how housing can be a rather complex undertaking with many variables, and in my own personal opinion, the most important one is the supply of housing. We've also discussed some of the problems that affect all of the countries in the region, and many of them are very similar. And it was something that remarkable to me to learn that the U.S. faces similar problems. So we do have a challenge to face. My name is Rodrigo Navas, Manufacturing Unit Chief of IDB Invest, and we work in housing issues. And I'm joined by 4 distinguished panelists, 2 clients with whom we have a partnership over the last few years, and 2 additional important panelists who are joining us virtually. I'd like to ask Domingo Valdez, Director of Finance for Vinte, who joins us today, as well as Guillermo Belochaga, Vice President of Adiperu. Likewise, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rafael Benin, General Manager of MRV Ingeniería Brazil, and Aurora Garcia de Leon, Director General of DEREX Desarrollo Residencial Mexico. Thank you.
Y bueno, para entrar en materia, me gustaría abrir el panel con una pregunta.
So, to delve into this topic, I'd like to pose a question to Rafael Benin. In your opinion, Rafael, what are the three main impediments that preclude us from building more public green housing units?
Primeiramente, bom dia a todos.
First of all, I would like to say good morning. It is a pleasure to virtually participate in this important event, even more so when we talk about affordable housing, which is something that is so important, especially for the countries in Latin America. At AMRV, we are a company that has 43 years experience in the market with more than 500,000 units built throughout our history. We are mainly focused on affordable housing. So answering your question, what we do understand by looking into the Brazilian situation is that there's still no legislation, any clear legislation that will guide the sector in order to deliver housing with items that have to do with sustainability. However, we have little by little perceived that the main Brazilian companies have practice on a yearly basis more sustainable approaches with a more industrialized approach to construction, with a smaller amount of waste, dealing with the supply chain and innovating with new construction techniques. It is also important to highlight that in Brazil, of course, is a continental country with more than 5,000 municipalities, and there is no rule or a legislation that applies throughout all these municipalities regarding housing. Each municipality will have their own rule. This will bring a smaller efficiency in our inefficiency in the sector. If we had, for instance, a national standard, we would, yes, be able to offer housing, affordable housing at a better and more efficient price. And this would allow the sector to be more sustainable. And also, the economic sector, not only in Latin America, but also in the US, of course, a very wealthy country, it is essential that we develop some kind of guided funding for affordable housing in Brazil. We have a source of funding, and it's called FGTS. This funding is made available with more than 60 billion reais, approximately $12 billion a year, to support affordable housing. This is important, however. What we see is that the rule will have a variation in time, so it's not that every year we will start with the same rules. So it would be ideal if we would have some kind of forecastability, a longer-term budget to work with, which would bring a greater comfort to the potential builders so that they can continue to expand their investments in affordable housing.
Rafael, muchas gracias. Obrigado. Domingo, te hago la misma pregunta. ¿Cuáles son los tres mayores impedimentos?
Domingo, Same question to you. What are the main impediments? Well, first and foremost, a very good day to everyone. It's interesting to listen to your question for Mexico, but we've managed to construct over 700,000 units in 2007 and 2008, and now we're down to 150,000. We have a very large population. The formal population has been growing on the order of 12 to 21 million inhabitants, most of them with formal jobs. And this after the 2008 crisis and the 2020 crisis with the drop in GDP. But nevertheless, we do see job growth continuing. So there's the demand, the mortgage products are there with Infonavit. Yesterday, we saw that this is a well-managed issue. At the institutional level, we have hundreds of millions of dollars in accounts, and the Mexican bank system has shown excellent stability with historical records. The only segment that saw any growth for the banking sector in 2020 was the one that focused on housing. So there's no doubt that there's a tremendous amount of need for housing. We have mortgage portfolios in the formal sector, but we've seen a drop in construction. With the growth in formal jobs, the needs of homes increase, and what we definitely need is equity. I think that since 2008, equity has been extremely restricted. There's been a strain both by the debt and other factors, but the ability for the developing sector to access more capital has led to the origination of debt, and this would allow us to undertake more construction projects involving green, sustainable housing. Very interesting. So clearly you're challenging us at IDB Invest to try and see how we can close that gap. Guillermo, same question to you. Hello, everyone. Speaking about the Peruvian case, I would like to talk about a concept that in Peru relates to the two worlds that we see in terms of housing and the economy, both formal and informal development. Peru has had, unfortunately, a growth in the informal sector due to various factors. Another important data point relates to the number of housing units that are built at every socioeconomic level, and we're talking about 128,000 units. Of these 128,000 units, 44,000 are informal. I'm sorry, 44,000 are formal, and the difference, the other 84,000, are informal in nature. So if we focus on the formal housing sector, and I would say, why not on the informal housing sector as well, there are three important elements. First of which is legislation, something that we heard from the Brazilian case. Legislation to be able to develop formal housing, given that we have a central government, a local government, private entities, banking entities, different stakeholders, so to speak, legislating, then we don't have an existing standard that can promote the development and growth of the housing sector. That's the first point. The second point relates to sanitation and water. Along the Peruvian coast, where we see the highest population density, suffers from water problems. It's not that it's not available, but we need to produce it. And we face certain limitations in that regard. So I think that with the adequate legislation, with support from the government and the state, or rather from the private sector, this can be developed, but this is a limiting factor because at present it's a very high cost and it makes projects not very feasible. The third element is financing. Housing is the same as financing. This is what converts the demand into a potential and real demand. I think those are the three main elements. Thank you, Guillermo. Aurora, I will close with you with the same question. What are the three main impediments that you see? Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I think we're talking about two different things, that which is green and that which is social. And just to complement some of the data presented by Domingo, in Mexico, the deficit is on the order of 2.5 million units of housing. And we need approximately 1.3 million units built every year, not just to overcome the lag, but also meet the demand. But we're only at 150,000 units per year. So in order to build affordable housing, clearly we have to deal with costs. And I wouldn't really refer to local legislation as mentioned by Rafael and my colleague from Peru. I think there are things associated with regulations that have to do with additional procedures that are being added. Just to give you some information, 13% of the infrastructure that needs to be undertaken in a city project on average in countrywide, these are public works at the city level that a single developer should not do by itself. Another percentage, we went from 3 to 12%, represents procedural matters. So we have additional elements that are not directly tied to the project that we have to learn how to do better. The second point, and I agree with my colleagues on this, has to do with adequate access to financing for purchasing. 62% of the economically active population in Mexico is non-affiliated. So given that a person needs a loan to be able to purchase a unit or a housing unit, or the majority of them need something, because they're not affiliated to the banking sector, then that's a huge impediment, and we need to find solutions for that. On the other hand, the population that is affiliated to the banking sector or to these financial systems, be it Infonavit or others, they're operating at very low levels, and we're not really providing the necessary supply. Now, I'd like to focus on green housing. I think that we need to try to standardize criteria. We have different certifications. We have EDGE, we have LEED, we have the general Infonavit rules. So depending on the green angle that you want to take on, then we need to attach certain specifications. And since I already mentioned that access to credit for the population at large is limited, then we need to look at this more carefully. Either we decide to approach this from an angle that will allow me to access financing for construction. In many cases, that could leave me out of other options. So those would be the three main impediments that I can think of. Thank you very much. And I see that many of the colleagues that are present here are making a note of all of this. So clearly there are a lot of topic areas that we need to start working on. Moving on to the next question. Rafael, what types of incentives and financial instruments specifically are required by developers and builders to be able to expand the portfolio of affordable housing?
Very well. The issues from what I heard in Peru, Mexico, Brazil, I guess all the issues are similar. We also have a deficit of almost 10 million units, housing units in Brazil, and currently the housing program has a budget that is being the real of 350,000 units per year. It is a good number. It is a broad market, but certainly the demand is greater than 1 million housing units a year. year. And currently, there are almost no resources from the National Treasury allocated in order to finance or support with subsidies the so-called affordable housing. There is a good financing structure with low interest rates and a long term. So a client in Brazil can finance up to 35 years with a 5% interest rate, which is a pretty good interest rate for the Brazilian level in terms of a developing country, of course. But as I said, this is a market that could be 3 times larger. And in order to do this, to take this quantitative leap, it would be very important that the government also participated with a earmarked budget for the affordable housing or social housing. So we believe that in an additional budget of 15 billion reais a year, if they were used as a subsidy to stimulate this market, we could, yes, instead of building 350,000 units in the affordable housing unit, we could have 700,000 housing units for social interest or affordable units in Brazil.
Producción sería un reto interesante. Domingo, sé que me adelantaste algo en la primera respuesta que me diste, pero
Domingo, I know you got a little bit ahead of me with this question, but what about the finances? Well, clearly equity is an important point. There's another point related to responsibility in housing and the impact derived from building housing. As we heard yesterday, building housing units is a complex matter which involves buying the land, getting all the permits, coordinating with all the local communities, building schools, water treatment plants, installation of electrical grid systems, potable water systems. We have to clean the water. We have to filter the rainwater through the underground process, the underground filtering process. And then we have the actual building process. If you're a home builder, then you have the responsibility to meet the EDGE criteria. You need to be able to offer different products, which is a delicate topic. When you talk about different products, you need to adjust to any changes that may be occurring in the macroeconomic factors, interest rates, and then we have guarantees later on. So if you have a project with 35,000 housing units, then that's a project that can take 10 years. So in this sense, it's really complex to do that, but you have a great deal of responsibility when it comes to the impact of this project. I don't know of any other sector in the world that has a greater impact than the development of housing. And this relates to SDG number 14. I think that we have the products in place, but what ends up happening is that when you have scarce capital in a world, when you're going from 700,000 housing units to 150,000, then you have to look at all of these issues, and on top of that, you have a lower margin, and it makes affordable housing development very difficult because of the feasibility, and there's not much of a return there. So we do need to attract more impactful investors that are willing to contribute these financing resources in accordance with the SDGs. Well, this is important for us because at IDB Invest, we try to improve the lives of people, but I've never seen in my entire career anything that improves the lives of people more than a decent home to live. So, to my colleague, what do you think we need to do in terms of innovative actions? Well, when we talk about housing, we have to talk necessarily about credit. And I would say that what is a necessary element in this point is making mortgages and credit available to the masses. In our country, for about 20 years, we've been working very hard and very effectively, notwithstanding the complexity of having to work with the state, and we've been undertaking a very important effort in this regard. The fund has two types of support. One is a subsidy that is directed at housing, primarily affordable housing, and to give it a number, we're talking about $20,000 to $30,000 per unit approximately.
And we have also some minor subsidies for properties of greater value. What is important is this complementary mortgage, not the subsidy. Financial entities in Peru are ones that are mostly aimed toward other kinds of credit. This type of banking hasn't penetrated much in Peru for various reasons. And I've seen there are experiences in other countries with specialized mortgages for regular people. A mortgage for residences is different than a more popular one, a more widespread one. And we need to have this kind of mortgage. For example, there's a case with regular financial entities regulated by the law of banking and securities, and these get the savings from people. But there's another way that's shown to be effective in other markets, and that is a system where there are mortgage banks that package these mortgages and sell them in capital markets, not with public funds anymore, but actually these are funds coming from sectors that wish to invest in this type of risk. And this fits in with other activities and other sources of capital that exist. So I would say that the creation of this kind of mortgage banking for the people is something that would be very important. And another matter that I'll mention, and we are told this is the case as well in other places, we need to promote support equity for housing activities for lower income levels. Thank you. The next panel, led by my colleague Marisela, is one where we'll hear a very interesting response to this question as well. Aurora, for our closing with you, the last question. How do we need to innovate in order for more housing to be built? Well, in terms of financing for supply, I think the IDB's model is very interesting because it's accessible, affordable credit with a lot of benefits, it's flexible, etc. If I wanted to give some advice to the IDB, I would say review that possibility of providing credits to medium and small-sized enterprises. 85% of companies in Mexico are medium-sized. They build less than 500 housing units per year, and 60% of production comes from those companies. So they're not being taken care of by our banks, and the IDB could generate a greater impact. As you say, improving lives. You could also fulfill the SDGs better if you arranged a good model for these companies. In the case of private banking as well, the traditional model is these bridge loans that we're using, and this was invented, created 2 or 3 decades ago, I think, and I think it came about in a different context. Now these bridge loans are becoming obsolete. Sorry to use that expression, but I think they're not flexible enough given the movement of the market. At Habitat, we have a more demanding population solution clients that have a bigger demand. So if you request or demand this, maybe you made a mistake or conditions changed, then you cannot adapt. Or if costs go up because of inflation, you cannot adapt. So in that, so in that search, we need to find something new. We need to make these projects more viable. I think the use of technology in both situations can be valuable. We have a lot of mechanisms that we didn't have before 5, 10 years ago. For example, the possibility of satellite monitoring or electronic invoicing. Artificial intelligence could generate options that might allow us to massify these loans, and I'll use Guillermo's word in this context as well. I think that would be another path to explore. Thank you very much. Let's think out of the box, as we say here in the US. Let's think about public-private relationships. What institutional mechanisms would help us promote this type of initiative so we can build more housing? Rafael, we'll start with you.
Right. I will actually repeat myself somewhat, but I would say that considering our particularities in Brazil, the government authorities, well, if we had in our national legislation or an act that would apply to all municipalities by the same rules, we would definitely have more effectiveness and would be able to provide the same housing structure at a lower cost. This is a key point. The second point is also mentioned by my colleagues, my co-panelists. It seems to be an issue for Latin America, is red tape, bureaucracy. In Brazil, on average, it takes 3 years to obtain all the due permits, the due licenses for a project, 3 years. So the capital cost, the equity cost is huge for companies. And in Brazil, we also have the informal housing production at very high levels. It is something that should not be happening. Had we operate in this, been able to operate in an industry with shorter cycles, we would not see so much informal construction projects. And we do have a subsidiary in Florida, in Texas and Georgia, our branch offices in those 3 different states in the United States. The average time, the mean time to obtain a permit is 6 months. In Brazil, 3 years. So what is the cost? What does that imply in terms of the end cost for housing? So, most certainly, very high cost. And it's also important to mention that a legal framework, legal safety is also an issue for Latin America. In Brazil, you start a project. In the middle of the project, the housing project, you might have a prosecutor questioning your permits and your processes, and then you have to block your project. And this also has a social impact, an economic and social impact. Therefore, the regulatory framework needs to be clear, needs to be in place. It's also a problem other companies like Peru, Mexico, and might probably share. And finally, the Treasury basically does not have a budget that is allocated to affordable housing. We do have credit for construction companies, for end customers, which is good. We have 400,000 affordable houses that are built annually in Brazil. However, this could be a much larger market where there are additional subsidies that were provided for customers. to purchase those units. So there is a demand of 1 million houses annually, but an important portion of the Brazilian society does not have enough income to operate in the formal market. So if we were able to tackle these 4 areas, the Brazilian market could grow much further.
Ótimo. Y solo puedo decir amén. Domingo, te paso la misma pregunta.
Same question to you, Domingo. I think in terms of public-private partnerships, this is so important. You need to have mortgage banking, you need to have structures like Infonavit. On the private side, you need banking that can be selective, but and the product is obsolete. I agree with Gloria on that. It needs to be renewed, but the banks are there, the credits are there. There needs to be, of course, credit rating and all that, but there's something that's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's greenwashing. And this term came about to describe those companies that receive green funding and they don't necessarily act in a green way. So I would talk to investors, to funds. Many of them are very large and they claim to be ESG and to address the SDGs. We agree that the housing sector in Peru, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Bangladesh, wherever, has an important impact on 14 of the 17 SDGs. However, those funds or savings funds or global funds that say they are being responsible and yet they're not participating in any significant way in the housing market, I just don't think that can be true. I think there should be a push by some institutions that should seek out that to make that accountability of those investors effective as well. I understand what you're saying. Yes, Guillermo, what would you say regarding the Peruvian case? I have a similar idea to what my co-panelists have mentioned. I would say if we're talking about housing development, housing construction, social housing in particular, I think we should have stakeholders where the state has its role, private entities have their role. I think that has more or less been established. But in the case of Peru, I would also go back to the issue of water. Water is an essential element and it goes beyond housing development. It is more of a geographic effect that it has. We have institutions in Peru that develop plans for developing these networks so we can supply water to the population, and that can be done in different ways that come together through private entities or through the government, which can talk to private entities and say to them, please, you develop this portion of the water network, and they can do it. And I think where the government needs to work with the private sector in a more intensive way, and I'm mentioning this as an opportunity, is on water supply. That's extremely important for us. I would also mention credit. Currently, approvals for subsidies provided for housing are granted through our annual budget law. And what happens is that this is an annual law, and for the following year, it needs to be approved again. This support line needs to be reapproved. This should be done multi-annually because these projects take longer than a year to finish. So if we have a 5,000 housing unit project, it's a 6-year project, it's a large risk because we have these mortgage lines for the first year, but not for the rest of the years. Why not look at this as an investment instead of just an expenditure and have a multi-year framework for it? And this will also mean that more capital and there will be less risk and more capital will be willing to go into this sector. More companies will opt for a larger projects or larger volumes. Very interesting insight. Yes, Aurora, now we go with you for the last few minutes. Thank you. Yes, I agree with what has been said. I would add something more. What you said, plus, I think the challenges are so big that we need to open up ourselves more to innovation, thinking outside the box, as you said. We need to break the rules. That's what innovation means. And as we see, many of the regulations are generated at the local level. So for a developer business, these innovations are a risk, investing in them and perhaps managing something that is complex. So I'd like to really highlight the word collaboration. And maybe these collaborations are not recipes, but rather on a case-by-case basis. They need to be designed according to the needs of, for example, in this case, the municipalities of Mexico. So we need to form a mechanism, come up with a mechanism so that in an institutionalized way, perhaps with the support of the government, we can reduce risk for investors so that these small study cases, but they have been proved, can go beyond the theoretical level and can be used to help with the evolution of our local regulations. We need to cooperate with them, help them with these small case study projects so that we can constantly reform and improve our regulations. Thank you. Now here's $1 million question. As you know, we have clients and others who have joined us all over Latin America. And we have a lot of different people listening to us. So you represent 4 successful, innovative companies. So my question is, what is MRD doing in Brazil today that is your biggest success and that you think should be replicated in other Latin American countries in order to mitigate the housing shortage? Go ahead, please.
Rafael's microphone is closed.
No te escuchamos, Rafael.
We cannot hear you, Rafael. Sorry, my microphone was closed. Well, I would say we have touched on all the key points related to affordable housing. We have also been looking closely here at MRV on how we can move forward in innovation and back to what Aurora just said a moment ago. Maybe our industry, well, we can say our industry has not made as much progress as the automotive industry, the chip industry, and other important industries. Over the past 50 years, we have not made much progress, so to speak. And in this next decade, in this current decade, we are going to focus particularly in industrializing our processes through innovation, automation, and we will therefore be able to provide better products to our population that will be affordable to our customers in Brazil. And Brazil has a regulatory framework that is actually solid. However, if we talk about the bureaucracy, the budget, the subsidies that are available, and if we also look at the companies in the industry, they should continue investing in technology and innovation. And by bringing all of these factors together, we can actually grow this market. This market can continue to grow in Brazil and Latin America.
Domingo.
Thank you.
¿Qué debieran copiar la gente de Vinci?
Yes. Well, I would say definitely that the partners that we've worked with are the most important factor in our success. We've built lots of housing units. We still build 4,000 or 5,000 units. We grow at a rate of 15% per year in spite of some deep crises we've had in 2008, 2009, 2020, macroeconomic crises. We have succeeded in this, and this would not have been possible without the essential help and support that we've received from IDB Invest in the last 12 years, as well as from IFC, IFU, the SDG funds, and others. So from my perspective, the partnership structure is the essence that we've achieved, is the essence of our success, and it's the part that should be replicated. It's who you work with is such an important aspect, and it's the business model that we would need to replicate. You can build 5,000 quality housing units or low quality housing units. So these partnerships help us to do what we do better. The impact and the development that we provide is better. We're the developer that has produced the most housing units in the world, 3,000 units. We've certified over 8,300, and the only reason why we haven't certified 52,000 is because that didn't exist 19 years ago. And being able to generate these savings in CO2, in water, in energy, all of this has an impact that can be more easily measured today than earlier in our history. And that's why we need to focus on this and call attention to this with these examples of partnerships that are so important in order to replicate our business model. Something new that we're doing and that can be replicated, I think, and we're seeing it being replicated successfully in the region, is the PropTech and FinTech aspect of it. This is key for us. We've just started a new iBuying business that's going very well, and it involves rebuying our own houses that we sold years ago. And we do this in a technology first way through this vehicle, 100%. And what we're looking at is the possibility of adding liquidity to our developments. The seller will have someone trustworthy to sell it to. The buyer will have someone trustworthy to buy a used housing unit from. We can have the guarantees that we know from the information we have on the cloud, what the full characteristics and features of that property are, who it was sold to. Is there a mortgage on it, or is there any, are there any delays in the payment of water or electrical power invoices? So we can take care of that, and we can have a new client come in with a more positive vision, and this adds a lot of value for the entire community. And at the same time, we're growing this business. We see that it's growing. We also made 3 investments in high impact vehicles, including Casa Bravo. Rent to buy is the concept here. And this is a type of mortgage, or it's a sort of preliminary mortgage. You help the client save by paying their rent, and also through a 20% down payment throughout a 5-year period, so that the client can get a mortgage at some point during those 5 years. So I think these are new mechanisms that very quickly are spreading to other parts of Latin America.
And Jave is a PropTech, FinTech based 100% on mortgages without subsidiaries. And this is in one country, but these PropTechs are spreading throughout Latin America. Breaking paradigms as usual. Guillermo, how did you become the leader in 3 of the 4 sectors that we're most interested in? Well, I'd like to comment also about our experience in Peru regarding portals in the housing sector are 3 separate businesses. One is residential housing, where we sell approximately between 300 and 500 apartments per year. Another business is social housing. We've been talking about that, where we sell 2,000 units per year. These homes, the idea is to have an aggressive projection for the next few years and increase it to 3,000 homes. For that, we need land, water, and credits. We're working on sustainability in order to achieve this. And I'd like to tell you about another experience that's very important for us, which is urban rehabilitation or renovations. We do this as well in urban areas. We sell 7,000 rehabilitated plots per year. It's called vivienda digna, decent housing is the concept. In Peru and part of other parts of Latin America, no, we have formal developments and we have informal housing without access to credit, water, or property titles. So there's an in-between there, that dividing line. The first step is toward formal housing, often happens through a social housing unit, but a lot of people, because they can't get a loan or for whatever reason, they're not qualifying. So our business offers them a plot of land that can be worth between $10,000 to $20,000, just to give you an idea. And how do you have access to this land? Well, first I have to say that they have water, electricity, sanitation, streets, sidewalks. It's a formal development. So that's the product that is delivered. And then the next complex matter is getting a loan, getting a mortgage. So we have a financing aspect within our business to give them direct credit, because scoring from banks is harsh sometimes. This person does not have a formal job, for example, so they can't get a loan from a bank. So we have about 15,000 clients with credit ratings that are not great, but it's if they're in arrears and some payments, we have ways to deal with that. And with these clients, we're in the process of educating them, because when they finish paying for their plot, they have a property, they have a bank account, and they more easily can have access to funds to build a home. We make it easier for them to get blueprints or whatever they need, so they can build their home in a formal way. So it's a system that's different than what I've seen in other countries, but it's been working rather well in Peru, and perhaps it's a model that can be used to provide decent housing, which, as you said, is something that does allow us to change lives. Guillermo, we've been looking at these portals for over a decade. 3.5 years ago, I got to know your project and I fell in love with it. I think all the countries should have this kind of tool. It's an extremely powerful bankerization or formalization tool to help people become part of the formal system. Go ahead, please. Yes, 8 or 9 years old, we established a policy for research and development, and we've done several projects in this regard. We've been studying energy efficiency. We have 20,000 new housing units with this kind of new environmental element added to it. It's the building, it's the design, the efficiency, and then also in a parallel way, we have urban development as such. And here we found through time that we've been looking at the value added and the profitability, and we see that it's higher when we work in urban development than when we work on the buildings themselves. And we have a project that I really like. It won us the National Housing Prize. It's a very important award here, and we worked with an important architect in our country, and it's worth reading the literature about it because we added elements from each one of the research projects we did, and it's focused on saving transportation costs in terms of people, in terms of municipal services. It includes a gender perspective, and when we talk about the gender perspective, we're not talking about designing for women, but rather designing for minority groups in general, people with disabilities, seniors, etc. And it also green areas are focused on, and it's a country where temperatures can be very high. So we need to work on urban development with an eye to including tree cover, etc. And I say that we sell forests. We sell a forest with a house in it.
Climático local. Pero creo que algo de lo que más me gusta en sí de ese proyecto y de los demás es el énfasis que damos en la organización comunitaria. Poco se habla de la sostenibilidad social y en realidad creo que este elemento contribuye muchísimo a que los vecinos empiecen a resolver sus temas
to the fact that the neighbors are able to resolve their own problems and have a relationship with the municipalities. We also have a program for monthly activities with each of these projects with 3 underlying topics: safety, the love for Mexico, and the environment. So I believe that this is something a little more complete. It's not so much the certification of a building per se, but I think that the focus that we should give this should be a wide-ranging one, and this has provided us with good results. Sometimes this could take 4, 5, 6 years while you analyze a project, but the benefits that we have as a company is that we understand the value added that we see from the beginning, because we are doing a project that in the end are very attractive for the people that are going to use these housing units. Yes, it's very important. This is almost as important as building the house. Well, the equity, the surplus value is important. I know that I made a mistake, and perhaps we should have had a little more time than an hour, because with the knowledge, the experience, the success stories of our 4 panel members, well, I hope that for next year, we're able to continue. I actually want to thank Rafael Aurora. We speak about technology, Domingo Guillermo, and thank you kindly for being with us.
El mismo tema de ayer.
It's almost difficult to say which of the panels have been the best. All of them are very, very interesting, and so was this one. Now we're going to panel number 6. It's our second panel of the day. This is called Innovation in Financial Products to Reduce the Gap, the Housing Gap. Now I would like to invite Maricela Alvarenga, who is the division chief for financial intermediaries for Fininvest. She will introduce all of the members of the panel. Maricela Alvarenga. Good morning, everyone, and thank you kindly for being with us. We're so happy to have these meetings, both physically as well as being able to see people and give you a hug, and having colleagues and clients, people who help us, with whom we share our energy. This is the second panel of the day. We will be talking about the financial innovation in order to breach the housing gap. I believe that this is a clear transition between what we were saying during the previous panel. I wish to thank all of you, and I wish to thank my colleague Rodrigo, because we were talking about the developers, about important projects in Mexico and Brazil, in Peru, but now we have the other leg, the leg of how to finance and how to reach the people who require housing. This panel will focus on this exactly. We will talk about a number of stakeholders of the financial system, fintechs, banks, investment funds, that will bring to the table what they're doing within their models in order to be able to finance more, to reach more, and to be much more accessible. In other words, to provide housing more accessibly to the population of Latin America and the Caribbean. I would like to invite Giselle de Tejeda. She's the Executive Vice President of Finances at the Banco La Hipotecaria Panamá. Welcome. And now we have Camilo Alvance de Arriaga, the Vice President of Builders for the housing bank, Banca Hipotecaria in Colombia, and David Muñoz, who's the CEO of Creditú in Chile. And we also have Randall Locker, who is the Director of Investments and Sustainability in the Millennium Partners of Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all and welcome. I would like to start by opening the panel with you. We've spoken about developers. Now let's talk about financing, the financing of mortgages. What have you seen in the financial products that we are offering, above all in Central America, Panama, Salvador, and now that you've expanded to Colombia? Yes, of course, thank you. I wish to thank all of you for this great invitation to the Housing Forum that we are celebrating. You think that you can innovate with such a traditional product as the mortgage product, which is quite standard for every country, but the way in which this is done is how we are able to approach the client. In the last few years, we who have operations in Panama, Salvador, Colombia, have focused on the digital aspect. More than 70% of what we are originating in the pipeline, in the production pipeline, is via the online method. We have tools that allow clients. We, of course, promote ourselves through the networks that are very powerful today, especially for young people who wish to buy, who wish to purchase a home. And this allows them to have access to the housing projects that are available. And we've also provided a financial calculator that allows them to estimate what they would be paying on a monthly basis, and also to pre-qualify online. This is hugely important for the clients as well as the fact that we have facts that allow them, once they've been approved, to follow up on their credit score at the time, until the time when they disperse. In terms of mortgage credits, we can't only think about a bank and about a client who is the debtor. We have to think about the constructor, the builder, the promoter of housing. And we have tools that allow them to upload the information of their buyers so that the process is much more agile, and to provide approval in 16 hours, which is the final goal that we want to do. We want to know if that credit has been approved or not. So basically, this has been the focus, and it is also important to mention and understand that low-income and medium-income families have this dream. It's the dream of all these families, being able to have a home, which, as you mentioned, improves their lives, not only their lives, but it allows the family to create that legacy, that money that they will leave their children. So I see this as the innovation, the digital innovation. Thank you so much, Giselle. This is also about creating dreams and improving lives. Now let's go on to Camilo. We mentioned the developers and how they're involved. What do you see in terms of housing? How do you see that chain and the financing through the chain and the innovations that you have promoted in Colombia? Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I wish to greet all of you. I would start by saying that the Banco de Vivienda is part of the Dow Jones Index for Sustainability. So this already sets the path, the trajectory that takes us to sustainability. In other words, respecting the environment. So our chain, our ecosystem, our housing ecosystem, it starts with the developer, the builder, because 70% of the finances come from new housing. So we start with support to the developers and to the builders. And as you mentioned, was mentioned through the panel, through the certifications. We support the certifications, Ex-Prim, Casa Colombia, different types of certifications, and we support the builders with a person who is assisting in developing that certification on the one hand. On the other hand, we have the support in building through the BIM logistic. We support BIM for the circularity, for the efficiencies that are required. And lastly, in green building, of course, there are benefits in terms of interest rates as opposed to the normal rate that we have for the projects that aren't sustainable. And after that, we go on to long-term credit for housing. This credit is important for individuals. More than giving them a credit to buy a home, we start by providing education, financial education, so that we can go in deeper. They understand the dynamics better, so that we understand where we want to be in the pyramid. We have another product, which is a billfold, which is a little more sophisticated than a regular one. It has 13 million clients. And there, through analytics, which is one of the most important aspects of our work, is one of the most important aspects in our work, to understand those buyers. Who are they? What are their behaviors? So that we can go in deeper within this pyramid. So we have an analysis that is directed to younger people, to women, that are extremely important topics today. Our credit is geared towards sustainability long-term. And I would like to repeat this, we're not just financing, we're financing the dream of so many people whose main decision in their life is buying a home. Thank you, Camilo. Yeah, this is very, very important, and we're seeing all of these innovations through the digital schemes. I think the pandemic made it clear that we had to make progress so that we could reach more people without the need to be there present physically. Now let's go to David. In the previous panel, we talked about FinTech projects. You're the CEO of Creditu, a FinTech that focuses the housing activities. I'd like to know about your platform. I'd like to know what examples you can provide us in order to escalate all of this. Well, first of all, thank you, Marisela, for inviting me to be part of the Housing Forum 2022. Thank you, IDB, for being part of the solution for this deficit, for the housing deficit. To be part of that solution is important. I'd like to start off by saying who we are. Crédito is a company that was born in 2017 in Chile,
Our main goal is to democratize the access to financing. And with this democratizing focus, we have been concentrating on families, on people who don't necessarily have the best access to bank financing. And with this understanding and with this identification of housing deficits, we know that there are segments that just don't have this access to buy a home. We started our process of expansion in 2019. We disembarked in Peru, and now we're also working in Mexico as well as in Brazil. Since then, we're very proud of being able to originate $500 million in financing, supporting thousands of families for them to receive their mortgage credit. Now, focusing specifically what it is that we're doing to have an impact on society with credit, just to give you a few figures. Last year, for example, in 2020-21, 85% of all this was granted to families that were focused on social housing. And within this, we have two sub-focuses. The first one has to do with the gender politics. Last year, going back to our original portfolio, 45% was directed toward women leaders, household leaders. And the other very important sub-focus is toward the migrant population. Those people who, for one reason or another, had to abandon their country, and they had to settle in another country with their family and build their lives again. And somehow these people become very vulnerable. They don't have a bank history, aside from the fact that they have paid their bills, they have paid their credits, but the banks don't recognize them. So we are focusing this a group of people with this focus. So Creditu, since it was born, has used technology as the main facilitator of business. We want to make life much easier for the client during the entire process, not only in obtaining, but being able to go forward with their credit mortgage. The digital process has to help facilitate the complexity of receiving credit. This on the one hand, and on the other hand, as Camilo mentioned, we've started to use analytics, advanced analytics, in order to have better subscriptions. Our niche of clients could be seen as a niche that has risk, so we have to have advanced models. In our case, we have machine learning models that help us make all the decisions. This is fundamental in order to provide a good return to the investor with a portfolio with a little bit of an impact, but remembering the risk levels. And this is how Creditu, as a fintech, has been able to speed up the obtaining credits, but also in a very smart fashion, if I might say. This is fascinating what you're saying. Now, I'd like to invite Randall, who's with us online. Randall.
On the current demand for affordable and sustainable housing in the region. For instance, are the developers, commercial banks, and households willing to build, finance, and buy this type of housings? What do you think?
Well, thank you, Marcela, and thank you to the IDB for the invitation, and good morning to all. Well, no doubt there is tremendous demand for sustainable housing in Latin America. As we all know, and as David just said, the housing deficits across the region, are in the 8-9 million home per country range, in Brazil and Mexico, and these numbers are only growing. So the housing demand is exploding, and it has been, for decades. In terms of sustainability, any features that can lower an electric or a water bill for a buyer, go straight to the bottom line of that family and gives them more money for food, clothing, education, and other necessities. So there's no doubt that buyers want sustainability. The question is, for developers and investors, does it make economic sense for us to build sustainable housing? Do the benefits outweigh the costs? And I think historically, the answer was probably not. It didn't really pencil to add sustainability to these homes. But in most markets today, it does make economic sense. And this is largely due to the financial products that are available today. Banks, like developers, aren't going to do this out of the goodness of their own hearts, but they'll participate in the system if they can make their lending spreads. So, they'll subsidize interest rates, for mortgages and construction loans if they can lower their cost of capital. So, issuing a green bond at a lower rate, these banks can turn around and lend at lower rates. And that really, makes the whole system work. And I think it's working quite well in some countries like Colombia. Bancolombia and Davivienda are using an IFC structured green bond to lower construction loan rates to developers, as long as those homes are certified under EDGE or under Casa Colombia. In Mexico, the Eco Casa program works in much the same way, subsidizing construction loan interest rates. And for a buyer, if you can get a lower mortgage rate, that makes the home more affordable, and more affordable makes for faster sales pace. And faster sales pace is what developers are looking for when we're solving for an IRR, of a project, an internal rate of return that makes sense for our investors. So faster project is better for the IRR. You save fixed costs by reducing the amount of months that you need to develop a project. So this mortgage rate program is working quite well too. In Peru, the Bono Verde program can reduce interest rates 200 to 300 basis points for mortgage buyers. That makes it an absolute no-brainer for developers to certify homes in Peru to take advantage of Bono Verde. In Mexico, there's the Hipotecas Verdes program as well, where banks will lend more if you can demonstrate that the utility bill payments are lower. So a household only has so much money to pay. Lower utility bills means more money for the mortgages, so they can get higher loan to values, which again just makes for sales easier for the developers. So, I think today there's some really good things happening across the region. For us as investors, we're very committed to sustainable housing. I think the one thing I would just mention in Brazil is the one region that I think has some catching up to do. But I think generally speaking, the region's doing a good job of making it clear to developers and investors that it makes sense.
Thank you so much, Randall. Eso me da la cabida ya para seguir con la siguiente pregunta, porque Randall mencionó muchos temas de instrumentos, de qué estamos haciendo por el lado del financiamiento de
instruments, what we're doing in terms of financing long-term financing for the financial institutions. You talked about green bonds, thematic bonds, gender bonds. In the previous panel, we talked about the warehousing lines. So I wish we could go a little deeper into that, and I would like to start with you, Giselle. Warehousing. You have quite a bit of experience in this. I think you've been working in this for over 10 years. Tell us what the product is like. How does this help in financing mortgages? Yes, of course, Marisela. I'd like to share with you that in its business model, the financial institutions warehouses mortgages and then titles them. And it's based on volumes. And this is done for the operations that we have in Panama and Salvador. The facility that has been provided by the IDB aligns with our business model. What does this mean? The facility allows us to originate the portfolio through the financing, to warehouse it for about 3 years. At least this is the period of time where we can analyze credit for clients to see who are, what clients are the ones that are ideal to provide the title, and then we can make the payments in advance, and then we can start the whole cycle once again. So this is an opportunity that covers 3 cycles, in other words, to title, to repay, and so on. So this gives us a great flexibility in our business. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that this facility goes along with the advisors. This advice is very important because they also have a support with subsidies by the IDB. We just did an evaluation on gender, which has allowed us to improve the policies, the internal policies in terms of retention and attraction of human talent. In terms of gender and inclusion, there's another study on measuring the social impact of our product and how to measure all this internally. As we know today, metrics are very important. This is basic, obviously, and whatever we can determine for the social impact of the products that we provide, the heads of families, women, family, income, and so on and so forth. This is all important, of course, and I'd like to add, lastly, that in Colombia, which is a market with a local currency, it's a very young market in terms of mortgages. What we did was that we structured during the pandemic a social medium-term bond, and it allowed us the access to currency, to local currency, medium term, and at fixed rates. So working with the IDB, I don't want this to sound like I'm hooting their horn, but it really has provided the management and the flexibility to try to find the solutions that have a good impact on the business. So thank you, Giselle. As Randall said, and as you mentioned, the bonds. And what we did with the mortgage company is really wonderful. This is socially oriented in local currency. So we had issued the new, or the first, gender social bonus. Randall said this earlier, but we want to say why we love this type of structure, because we're able to promote all this so that it goes well beyond, so that there's a greater scale and financing volume. So we issued this new, or this first, gender bond, which is a combination between small and medium-sized industries and women-led industries. Yes, the first bond in South America and the first gender bond in Latin America. It's a 7-year bond, $100 million, and obviously this had to be placed in total. This had to be small and medium-sized industries, women-led industries, and homes, 90% in housing, 30% is in small and medium-sized industries. So this contains all of the characteristics for the Association of International Capitals. It's a bond that has a certain market characteristics and capital characteristics that are important. So it does fulfill all of the requirements at an international level, at the marketing at an international level. So as an anecdote, the Banco de Vivienda in Colombia is a top 5 brand in Colombia, and we've determined that this is a banking facility. So housing means women. And we have a very interesting portfolio, home portfolio. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulties hearing him. And 28 million are for housing for women. And in this portfolio, 65% or 50% is for women, and 65% of that portfolio is for women who head households. So once again, this underlies the fact that housing means women. This portfolio is very significant for women, and 5.8% of the portfolio is for women, 6.7% for men. So I believe that this favors women, and this is a housing portfolio, a social interest portfolio, and here we have the interest of the bond. And and we lead this as a bank in terms of housing, in particular toward women. This is a clear focus that we had. And you mentioned all of the instruments, the tools that we have. We're trying at the same time to go in deeper and make sure that we provide this product for women, for mothers, for heads of households. And of course, you know that there is a gap between what we're able to provide and what is requested. The work that has been done with Bid Invest was very fruitful, and this bond was seen as an innovation at an international level because of its innovation and because it attained its goal. Thank you very much. It was the first bond in Latin America, the gender bond, in order to promote more financing for women, heads of household, and women-led businesses.
Warehousing lines about the thematic bonds and the gender bonds.
Randall, we're talking about the housing.
We provided also financing with certain targets also to Palladium. Can you tell us more about it and also tell us about the net zero strategy and how you are going to proceed with that?
Yes, thank you. We recently certified the first EDGE zero carbon residential project in the world at a project outside of Mexico City. And, we're raising funds to replicate this project across the region and really want to demonstrate to the world that you can build a net zero carbon project and still make a competitive return. And we think that this is entirely possible. To do this with EDGE, I think we're all familiar with EDGE is a 20% savings in energy, water, and embodied energy and material. To get EDGE zero carbon, you first have to get EDGE advanced. So you need a 40% energy savings instead of just 20. Then you measure the actual consumption for a year, and then you offset that consumption with the purchasing of carbon credits to get the net carbon footprint down to zero. So at our project in Mexico City, there was really only one component that cost cost some real money, and that's the solar panels on the roof that heat the hot water. And those cost about $1,000 each. So that's about 2% of, a $50,000 home. And the rest of the components really don't cost anything. We use a building system with lightweight aluminum frames that's much lighter structure, less concrete, less steel, produces much less waste. We use energy efficient appliances that cost no more, low flow plumbing fixture to reduce the water, reflective paint, operable windows that you can open and close for cross ventilation. These components basically don't cost anything more. So really it's just a 2% increase for the solar panels. And then in terms of the approval costs, you have to spend some money on the registration and certification with the Green Building Council of America, which is about $50 per unit. We paid our consultants about $25 a unit for their fees. And then the offsets, each home basically emits about a ton of CO2 per year. So we bought those offsets for $3 per ton. So that's about $3 per unit per year to offset the carbon. So, in terms of those approval costs, it was about $80 per home, which is about 0.2% of the cost of a home. So overall, the costs of this process were about 2.5%. To get the EDGE zero carbon certification. And, again, the demand for these homes with their sustainability and this reduction in the energy bills every month it's just a huge value add. And, the project is doing fantastically well. And we're really excited to do more of it. And we're really thankful to the IDB for their faith in us to go to do this in Brazil, Colombia and Mexico. And I think it can be just a tremendous example to the other developers and the other investors that, we can tackle sustainability, and also affordability. These are Infonavit homes, in the $40,000 to $60,000 range. So you can really tackle sustainability, affordability, and return a compelling IRR and multiple to your investors. So yeah, we're really excited about this fund going forward.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Randall. Hablamos género, hablamos instrumentos, hablamos incentivos.
Well, we've talked about gender instruments, incentives in terms of the financing that we make available to all of you. When we talk about the digital sector, I'd like to ask what barriers you've run into in terms of regulatory issues, challenges in being able to scale up the digital aspect of this and make more financing available for housing. Well, it's very interesting what we've been hearing from Camilo and Randall. And in our case, we're going to have a similar structure. We have the second social bond with a gender focus in place. And in terms of the barriers, in every country where we operate, we always try to be on the cutting edge of technology based on what we have available. Right now, we have very relevant topics such as electronic financing, which makes it possible for us to streamline and accelerate the issuance of loans. During the pandemic, this was of particular importance because every country in which we operated had the lockdown in place, and it was almost impossible for people to go and sign off the paperwork for a loan. And we started to see a great deal of potential for the use of this technology. So that was an important barrier that was overcome with technology. And in some countries in the region, they've been working to be able to accelerate these information flows. On the other hand, we also appeal to what we look at as a commercial barrier for the banking sector. A bank tries to ensure that all of their clients have the same type of profile, and that's why we see entire segments of customers that are excluded from that. So we started to work on this, and through the use of advanced analytics, we were able to identify niche populations of customers that had a good payment history, that had a good relevant payment history, and yet they didn't have access to credit. So we tried to take this a step further, not necessarily create a general policy for mortgage loans, but we try to identify these spaces or client niches so that we could come up with differentiated policies to be able to service those clients. I really like the part related to identifying niches and creating a supply of products for those niches. In that way, you can start covering the needs for these various segments. Thank you very much, David. So now if we could get to a question that is more aspirational in nature, I'd like to hear from you. We have ministers here, we have developers here, we have people that are financing housing projects much as you are. What would be your advice? What is it that we're missing? How can we join all of these three stakeholders and close that 45% gap in the housing deficit that we have in the LAC region? Isabel? Well, I think there are a number of important points that we can share. Clearly, we have some public policies that promote housing financing and even construction financing. The most important for our niche, which is affordable housing, is obviously subsidies for the interest rate. This subsidy is important for the ability of a customer to qualify for a loan, and based on their capability for savings that may or may not be very high, this subsidy over time, as we see in Panama and Colombia, this becomes very important in our case. As advice, I think it would be recommendable for anything that you finance is that the full compliance with that subsidy is undertaken in the correct way with the necessary measures. Those of us as financiers of these mortgages many times end up holding the bag with the subsidies that should be paid by the government. Oftentimes we see the fund end, and so we can't disperse funds for these projects because we no longer have funding available. So we have to restart the process or wait until the next year until we get some funding available to continue operations. So that's the important part, subsidies to the interest rates. Another important thing is the initial payment to the program. In Colombia, when we talk about affordable housing, the program promotes savings among customers so that they can put together some savings, at least 10% of the cost of the housing unit. And this is accompanied by 10% that is matched by the state. And then we have a loan-to-value operation on the order of 80% for affordable housing units. In other countries, we have something similar. It's a solidarity fund whereby the government provides a fixed amount for the down payment, and this would then be paid to the builder of the housing unit. And this works in the sense that it diminishes or it improves the customer's ability to pay for a mortgage. And we've seen this happening in Panama. And another thing that's interesting for us to share is the issue of a direct discount. In Panama, there's a law that dates back to 1975. It's a very old law, but it allows entities to submit to employers of the debtors a discount based on payroll. So the payment to the bank is drawn directly from the employee's wages through the employee. So this helps us save on certain transactional charges. It ensures proper timely payment of the mortgage. And this is a support that is always in place until the mortgage is paid in full. But the difference or the challenges here arise when the employee then loses their job. And so we've had to deal with customers that, as a result of the pandemic, were forced to lose their jobs and transition to the informal economy because of the impact of the pandemic. But the program has worked very well, and it's been very helpful. Just to add something that I think would be very helpful in all countries, and these are standards that promote or oblige builders to incorporate other topics beyond just the green topic, so that financial agencies can have more financing products available, which is very positive for humanity at large. So right now, we don't have these types of regulations that reinforce the importance of having this affordable housing in place and its relationship with the environment. Camilo. Yes, I think we all want more subsidies, but let's face it, the resources are scarce. So any efficiencies that we can bring about in permeating these resources across the system would be extremely important. I think that we've heard on different occasions about different opportunities related to how we can expand the pyramid and dive deeper into the market. Clearly, we have a responsibility as a private sector to continue developing these tools that will allow people to, first and foremost, bankerize themselves, so that in that way they can demonstrate some payment habits that can then lead to people that are not yet bankerized, but that could then become eligible for credit. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do, and we do it through financial tools, education. And this is part of the overall scheme of digitalization. In Colombia's case, when we talk about subsidies, I think I'm not sure that I'm erring when I say that it's a success case because of the way it has worked, the way the funding is dispersed, and I'm referring to the subsidies. But clearly, as we've already heard, we need to delve deeper into this. But clearly, there are subsidies for the purchase at the beginning, or there are subsidies to the interest rates, and this makes the market something that's already familiar to everyone. This is something that's already been invented, and we just need to delve a little bit more deeply. And so we need to focus on guarantees and underwrite some of these loans, especially when we work with customers that are low income. And we could also ensure some of these guarantees for even affordable housing and provide the tools to reach out to a broader segment of the population. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, I think there are some key points that we've already heard from some of our panelists. First, we have to talk about public-private partnerships and the collaboration between those sectors. And if we want to move more rapidly towards the closure of this housing gap, we need to work together. There was a success case mentioned by Camilo, but in Chile we have something similar. We have really performed well with our subsidy, and something that has worked extensively is the collaboration that we have with private companies, and we've created opportunities and aligned ourselves in such a way that we can offer affordable housing of the appropriate quality with very, very affordable prices. There was mention about the direct discount and or the direct payment rather frameworks, and this really helps maintain people on pace with their mortgage payments. Much of this was the result of public-private collaborations. We need to create special funds because one of the difficulties for public entities is that they need to come up with a way to create annual funds that don't require political intervention. So we need to be able to create multi-annual funding programs. Additionally, we need to move faster towards the use of technology, and all of the incumbents in the process of awarding credit or loans need to use the most up-to-date information to move this a lot quicker to other mechanisms such as open banking. It improves competition, it improves the access to financing, and it really expands the market. These are really basic key mechanisms that could serve to accelerate the growth in the region.
Yeah,
Randall.
I think there's a lot of things that they're getting right in the region. I think the government programs that create access to people's own social security money that they can put down towards mortgages is a huge driver of this market. Like Infonavit in Mexico, in Colombia you have the Cesantías program, in Brazil FGTS. So this really helps to subsidize people's affordability. And then I think additionally, the subsidies, I think Colombia, echoing other panelists, Colombia is doing a great job with subsidies. Panama is doing a great job with subsidies. I think in Peru, Mi Vivienda and Techo Propio, work pretty well. But the catch to all these programs is that they're only available to formal employees. And the rate of informality in Mexico and Brazil is in the 50% range. It's in the 60% range in Colombia, and you hear anywhere from 70 to 80% of employees in Peru are informal. So there needs to be policies to incentivize the formal economy in all of these regions, or else these programs just aren't accessible to the people that need them the most. In Mexico, under the Peña Nieto administration, there was a program to give 10 years of tax exemption for people to enter the formal economy. And I hear that worked, but that program is over now. and the red tape and the bureaucracy for people to be formal employees and for an employer to hire somebody as a formal employee is just so bureaucratic and costs so much, and there's so much work that has to be done to accomplish that it's a big deterrent to the formal economy. So I think, stepping back, the bureaucracy is just a huge bottleneck to this whole housing and mortgage system. And additionally, I'd just like to point out, we've heard like education and financial education and how important that is. And, the lack of financial literacy is such a burden to so many households. In Brazil, credit card debt today costs 400% interest per year. People paying monthly installments on their cell phones, their dishwashers, they're paying 180% interest on these, but they don't understand that. So, these people can't qualify for mortgages because they're so burdened by all these other revolving debts. And, it makes their situation, really difficult. So I think if you want to improve access and you want to improve the mortgage market and you want to really serve the people at the bottom of the pyramid, you need to start with financial education, to help people enter the banking system and help them be financeable.
Definitely, Randall. Ese es un punto completamente importante. Creo que lo hemos mencionado, pero
Clearly, Randall, that's a very important point. This is something that we need to reinforce if we want to delve deeper and get down to the base of the pyramid. We need to focus on financial education so that people aren't paying 400% for some of these credit card bills that they have. And that's something that we need to consider at the policymaking level, as well as in the private sector. I think we have a couple of more minutes. I'm told that I can open the floor for any questions from the audience. And we have here one person. My name is Rodrigo Zulueta. I'm a housing developer for social integration in Chile. And I say social integration because we don't just work with affordable housing, but we also use the housing program that our government offers through our minister who is present here, which has been very successful. More than a question, I'd like to call for something that Domingo from Mexico said in the previous panel about ESG and the impact that housing has. 14 of the SDG indicators that refer to social responsibility. And this was something that was mentioned by Randall as well. And it has to do with financial education, because in the Chilean case, this program that I'm not going to elaborate too much on offers guarantees to the financial entity for the loans. And if the person, the client, can't pay for that house, it'll go to a resale. And if the creditor doesn't have or doesn't recover the debt completely, then the state would intervene to cover that difference. And so there's charging different rates. For example, today we have clients that are working with financial aid entities that pay 3.9% interest rates for 25-year terms. And we also have customers that pay 6.4%, which is 65% more. So my call here for all of you is not to democratize this at any cost, because anything that ends up being or having a social return can dilute when people have to pay for twice the actual value of a housing unit. So if we're trying to improve the housing sector, we can focus on building more basic housing units, and we need to engender social mobility. So we're building with a look to the future, and this is what I'd like to do, is reinforce what Domingo said, to bring about mechanisms of socially responsible investment, because this can lead to social mobility and, more importantly, social cohesion. Thank you for your comment. Any response by any of our panelists? Yes, I think I was mentioning this. We don't issue mortgage loans, but rather we provide experience that we see in the homes. And this involves educating communities. It involves educating and supporting the public at large, and not just offer a mortgage. I mean, the decision to buy a home is the most important decision that a person can have in their lives. So this support that we provide is education that we can provide to customers, financial education. We also have other programs that we call Hogar Verde a la Obra. And this involves making people aware about the issues related to sustainability and the green product. So the cost of the loan and all that, in the end, ends up being ancillary to the real issues. And this is part of the housing ecosystem that we manage. And that's a huge component of that. Thank you, Camilo. Any other questions?
Good morning. Randall talked about one thing, and all the other colleagues also, that has to do with informal workers, with informal employees. This is a very specific feature also in Brazil. So what we're doing is we're changing in terms of a guarantor fund that we used to have, which used to cover a loss of revenue, death, and disability. So we're transforming this in a guarantor fund with any kind of default issues. So the idea is to have a coverage for a certain period of time during the duration of the contract, that if there is a certain level of default, this fund will cover the default in the financial system. And once the housing unit is recovered, the fund will be restituted from this amount. Does this make sense to you as panelists, to my panelists here, and to make this more accessible? Why so? Because in the credit risk system in Brazil, which is done basically by one bank with the public policy of social interest, basically we do not approve informal workers into the system. And the proposal is that this informal worker, who in some way will show their ability to generate revenue or to pay, will have the same level of credit risk as a formal worker. So this type of guarantor fund, this kind of guiding this to as a direct subsidy to people to guarantee the financial market, do you think that this would work more than a direct subsidy? Thank you.
So when we talk about these guarantees in this informal sector, what do you think? Well, clearly we need to place ourselves in the context that a mortgage loan is a 30-year relationship. So we're going to understand that we're going to have multiple economic cycles throughout the life of that mortgage. Now, clearly, we need to work with the independent or informal sector, but it's a very different thing because the collection of the payments will not be managed on a monthly basis. It may have to be managed on a weekly basis because we need to ensure that the customer can, in fact, and will, in fact, pay the mortgage. And unfortunately, in the Latin American markets, we don't see these informal sector payment systems. So this is both a culture